Welcome back. Lockdown has wiped out flu. No cases of influenza have been detected in England this year because of tough social distancing measures, experts say. And I always love these when they put experts say in the title. It's like, oh, well, we've got experts as well. But it's just to discount the experts you don't like on what grounds? Well, Tim Pool actually says a bit about this, but more so when it comes to political stances. That if you've got somebody that is, say, a controversial character, but they actually propose left-wing policies, then they'll be besmirched and say, nah, that's not really what they're suggesting. Like, there are some proposals which are kind of in line with something that is right, but no, not really. Whereas if they were to put forward a suggestion which is more along the right wing, then suddenly that is completely factually accurate and must be used to denigrate that person in their entirety. So it's a similar thing here when it comes to their experts. It's like, experts in what? Who are the experts? Can we know a bit about them? Or is this going to be another anonymous sources thing? Funny that, isn't it? But we will get into who it is and what they've said. The thing that gets me, though, is the suggestion that the lockdown has wiped out flu. Which, the other thing that annoys me similarly is to try and say, oh, all this has happened because of COVID. And that's not true either. So lockdown hasn't wiped out flu. Obviously not. It's just a lot of misdiagnosing. And this isn't all happening because of COVID. This is happening because of government responses to a global pandemic. They're the two things to actually be factually accurate. Similar to, say, government funded. No, they mean taxpayer funded. So, Public Health England is yet to record a single case of the influenza virus in 2020. Not that there aren't any deaths from it. No, but literally no cases. Having said that, they don't cover all the NHS trusts in the UK, so it is a limited sample size, but nonetheless. Dr. Vanessa Saliba said this was linked to social distancing and face coverings. Yes. So, you know how every winter we have thousands, if not over 10,000, old people die from influenza and other coronaviruses, because there are several, and rhinoviruses and the like. Yes, and it doesn't affect the younger people as much. Right. Well, how about we just have a national lockdown, basically forever, in order to save these older people? Because, hey, don't you know that it's the government's role to protect its citizens, and therefore there must be no end as to what they can do in order to protect citizens? And don't you be questioning as to whether or not this is worthwhile, or if you want them to do this, because they definitely know better, and they definitely would never abuse their power into suggesting that they're saving you from an enemy that isn't real. We've never seen that happen before. But yeah, so why is it then that they haven't decided on lockdowns like this before to protect the elderly? How convenient. And how is it then that if this is so effective, that they've just callously let tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people die over the past few decades when they could have done something about it? No, obviously not. So whatever stance you take, this, I think, is one of the inconvenient truths, if you will, to use their own language games against them, that they would rather try and brush under the carpet. But if they can't, then they're going to be saying that it's down to them being so amazing. As always. It always is. It's that government policy happens, and if a positive outcome happens, it's definitely what was intended, even if it's unrelated. And if a negative outcome happens, it's because people weren't following it close enough, and they just have to enforce this policy harder. And you see this with the old changing of the guard when it comes to elections as well, that if the party changes hands, or the leading party changes, then the previous government is going to claim any success and blame any failure on that government. Meanwhile, the current government is going to do the same and say, oh, well, the success we're having is because we're in, but the failures that we're having is a holdover from the previous government's policies. All government seems to be doing is not anything worthwhile, it's just passing the blame. And it's kind of understandable from a perspective where all they do is redistribution, because they do not create anything worthwhile themselves whatsoever. The only thing that I suppose they create is wealth for themselves and their cronies, but again, that is just redistributing from people who are actually creating things and then stealing it at risk of prison. But, the government is there to protect you. So they say, flu may have almost completely disappeared in England after brutal lockdown curbs thwarted the spread of the virus. Sure. Public Health England not recorded a single case of the virus so far this year, though routine surveillance tests, despite it being height of the usual flu season. Funny that. But this doesn't mean it has been completely wiped out, health bosses say. No, do you know why? Because it mutates. All the testing is unreliable. And both those statements are true about any virus. What are we going to do about that? We're saying we can have absolutely no cases. Fantastic. Doesn't mean that it's gone, though. Oh, I see the foreshadowing here. Oh, yeah. That when you eventually decide, look, we're going to pass over this coronavirus and just wait for the next thing, and just try and keep the holdouts of our overreach from the government until we can encroach upon them again. Basically overstep the mark far too much, so that when you pull back, you only need to do it halfway, and it seems like you've given freedoms instead of just not having taken complete control anymore. But it seems to be just foreshadowing of what they're going to do after this, which is actually something that they do mention. The mask is really slipping here. So Dr. Vanessa Saliba of PHE said social distancing, face coverings and hand washing had sparked the sharp drop in influenza infections. Yes, because, as we've seen time and time again, that since this all kicked off a year ago now, I mean a bit more than a year ago really, seeing as it was November, but anyway, in the UK, kicked off about a year ago. People were terrified. They didn't know what it was, and it was 2 weeks to flatten the curb. Okay, cool. And therefore, strict measurements were in place, and people were following this, or almost everybody was following this because they didn't know what was happening. Since then, attrition has set in, which means people are not following the guidelines nearly as closely as they did before, which is understandable. It's also what happens with any longitudinal study in psychology, that the participants tend to drop out. But as of the same, when you're trying to control 67 million people, that they are not going to be following your rules and regulations as tightly as they did at the start. At the start, they actually had internalized motivation in order to do it, but now it is just do the minimum possible in order to avoid jail time. So I do not think people have been holding up their social distancing, face coverings and hand washings nearly as much as you're suggesting. But, of course, people in institutions tend to lose touch with reality. So she says, the decrease in flu cases this year is likely due to changes in our behaviour, such as social distancing, face coverings and hand washing, as well as the reduction in international travel, she told The Independent. Ooh, reduction in international travel. How's that going to sit? Oh, we'll just cover it up with the other things and say that they're the main things, not international travel, because borders should be open. Yes. So, they do say, the lack of cases recorded through the official swabbing scheme by February 14th does not necessarily mean influenza is not in circulation. Exactly. Because all these viruses could come back, and therefore, we can never open up. PHA usually only checks samples sent to it by the NHS, which was overwhelmed with COVID patients. Or was it? The ONS has also continued to record deaths linked to the virus this year. PHE detects flu cases in hospitals by screening swab tests from NHS patients, so doctors can better treat them if they know they have flu. But again, it's all COVID, isn't it? PHE admitted in its own report that all indicators show influenza is spreading at low levels, but warned there is now limited testing for viruses that aren't COVID. Dr. Sleep added that cases were also low because of the flu vaccine, which more than 15 million people in England got last year. They do have to push their vaccines, of course. If something good happens, it's like, oh, what else, which is tangentially related, can we bring up in order to muster more support for our failing policies? Well, let's bring this one in. And just for your own information, 81% of over 65s have had the vaccine this year, along with around half of high-risk younger people and pregnant women, and a third of middle-aged people who were in an expanded group for 2020. Yep, so we have a unhealthier society than ever, with things like obesity and self-afflicted conditions being the main issues, and lack of sunlight and exercise from being stuck in offices, mainly. So, instead of thinking, maybe, just maybe, a way to be healthier is to do something which has worked for thousands of years. Something that is ancestrally relevant, if you will. But no, instead of that, let's just manipulate some egg protein, stick it in you, and you'll be good to go. I'm really thinking that they're missing the root cause. I'm not one for homeopathic medicine, per se, but nonetheless, I think we can all pretty much agree that a lot of these issues can be deterred by simply following a healthier lifestyle. Especially then when it comes to older age, where they all seem to come at once. Or maybe something that is more important to you is preventing cognitive decline. In which case, a healthier lifestyle, using your brain, these kinds of things are far more beneficial than being pumped full of drugs. But maybe I'm just old-fashioned and traditional. And then they go into the new plans to open up. Schools on March 8th, followed by friends and families being allowed to meet with one another in parks on March 24th. And then life eventually normal in June 21st. So it'll be well over a year from these 2 weeks to flatten the curve. At least it's not 2 years. But, as I said before, and I remain optimistic in saying so, that it's gone to the point where people are pretty much fed up with these lockdowns, and the governments are aware that they can't enforce it for much longer, and if they try, then there will be much greater civil unrest. And you can see this by obviously just talking to people or having a little different forums around, even the Daily Mail here, which is suggesting that this is the narrative to be pushed in there in support of it, that the comments don't agree with them either, and neither do the thousands in agreement with the commenters. So the public zeitgeist is definitely changing with regards to these things, and therefore it's my belief that the government cannot push it for much longer, and that is why they are planning to open up when they can. And they keep flip-flopping over things. For example, then vaccination passports, is that going to be international? Is it going to be domestic? Are they going to exist at all? Because they're just trying to put their finger back on the pulse of what it is that the public would accept. And of course they're going to go as far as possible, as in as authoritarian as possible, but they know that they can't overstep the mark, at least not too much. So keep holding them to account, fight for freedom. Let me know what you guys think down below. Most of all, as always, until next time, have a good one.